very fortunate today to have Glenn Poulos on the show, and I had to ask him how to pronounce that name, so I think I got it right. But Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance, the Henry Harrison Show, and is a business owner, and this is his third business he's on. He also informally coaches entrepreneurs. He's a public speaker. He's written a book. He's an AI enthusiast. But I would have to say all that ties in from our brief conversation so far, which we'll learn more about, to his passion for owning and running businesses. So welcome to the show, Glenn. Hello.
Hi, Henry. Hi, Henry. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit, it's a lot about what you're doing right
Sure.
now, and we'll start with that, and then we'll look at how you
Okay.
got here and some other things.
Yeah. So in 2022, I sold a company which I had been running for 15 years. And I stayed on with the private equity people for a period of time. But I saw the way that thing would play out, and the owners sort of scale out of the businesses. So I thought I'm not really ready to go off in the sunset quite yet. And large family, just got to make sure enough is enough. And so I thought, why not do it again? See if I can do it again. So as I was transitioning out of my old business with the private equity, the new owners, I bought a business in a new industry, but in a similar kind of business that would allow me to sort of take what I'd learned in my last two companies and apply them again, but also stay on side for my litany of no competes that I had when I sold the business to the private equity. So I'm running that business now. I changed so in order to stay safe, I changed technologies from telecom to power. I changed customers from telcos to utilities, and I changed countries from the Canada to the US. So I pretty much changed everything just to be on the safe side. But I'm running the same kind of business, distributor of high-tech electronic equipment used for testing and measurement of signals and the like. But instead of being in the telecom space, now I'm in the power utility space.
Terrific. Okay. And how did you find that business? What was the search like to, hey, I want to go find a business? Obviously, has some criteria, but where do you look?
Yeah, I mean, the place you can find, like Biz Buy Sell, is really one of the sort of go-to places for that kind of, and you can sort by distribution companies and medical companies and printing companies. You can sort by any host of types of businesses, and of course, my specialty is wholesale distribution. And that's a good way. It's kind of serendipity the way I came across this one. I had bumped into an old colleague who suggested another colleague was retiring, and the timing was really good, and I got together, and that's how we sort of fell together. And but I did find a lot of very suitable and in using the biz buy sell method, but that's not how I exactly bought this company. So I was referred to it by someone else.
And you've got so many companies. I want to make sure I get it right. What is this company?
This is Prog USA. So Gap Wireless was the company I sold to private equity, which became NWS. And then I retired after a certain period of time. And then I bought this business in Florida called Prog USA.
When did you buy that?
So I bought that in January of 2024. And I was still
Okay.
working in the old company, and the old owner was still running it. And then in January 2025, when I finished at my old business, which had a new name by this time, I had already owned it for a year, but I then joined them full time last January. So I'm coming up on a 1 year in the new company.
Sure. Okay. So that's your third company. So take us through a journey of how you became a guy that can write a book, be asked to coach informally, and buy a third company. Where did that all start? Because that's a lot of people's dream, is to do what you've done. And people are in the midst of doing it, buying, selling, starting, thinking.
Yeah. So I started by getting kicked out of the Canadian government as a civil servant. And as I like to tell the story, my boss thought I was in the wrong field. He said, you should go into sales. And I don't know what he saw. He saw something, I guess. And I took him at his word. I was in my early 20s. And he said, I don't think you're cut out for a lifetime working as a civil servant. And I probably somewhat agree with him. And so I got a job in sales, and it was selling high-tech electronic equipment. And I noticed how much control. I call sort of sales kind of a cheat code for increasing your income, because you don't need to have 14 years of medical diplomas, to make the money that a surgeon makes. You can make that in sales, and you can make it much faster than a surgeon can make, the money they're making. based on your capability to learn products, learn customers, and grow and nurture your, your business, right? And so there's not many other businesses that allow you to do that, right? You become an accountant, something like that. I mean, you're going to go through a certain number of steps, you're going to make a certain amount of money, and it's pretty much laid out the way it's all going to work, right? But in sales, you can sort of leap scotch up by being good at the job, right? The more you sell, the more you make, and you can create points of leverage in the products. But I learned that the owners of the company were making even more money because they had a bunch of salesmen like me running around doing the selling, plus themselves. And so when I sold, they got paid. When they sold, they got paid. So after about 5.5 years, I approached them about starting a business, and they turned me down. And so I suggested we break off a piece of their technology they were selling into and let me focus on it, right? And they really didn't have any interest in doing that, and they wanted me to stick to my knitting. And so I promptly quit that job, and without much warning, and I started my first business in 1991. I was 29 and a half, and I'd been selling for about 5.5 years at the time. And I was, I suggested we should focus on this newfangled technology that I thought was going to take off. And of course, it was the cell phone. And of course, that never went anywhere, right? I mean, that industry never took off at all, right? Who needs a cell phone, right? And so, I focused a business on helping in the Canadian market. This was building, maintaining a cellular network, not selling cell phones, but selling the network side of the equipment, radios and antennas and tower products and cable and everything that goes into building and owning and operating a cellular network, right? And that was the first business. I sold it, and I've had the freedom to start a second one, and I sort of focused even a little bit more, which became the Gap Wireless in 2007. And I ran that for 15 years, and then I sold it to private equity, which was in 2022. Worked for them until 2024, the end of 24, and now I'm in Prague, USA, in Florida on my third business, selling the same kind of equipment, but more in the power generation, power monitoring field in the utility space, looking to capitalize on the expanding and exploding market for power to drive data centers and things like that, which I feel is going to grow much, much more than the telecom over the next 5 to 10 years.
People sometimes give sales a bad rap. My first job was in construction. I became a kind of an assistant construction supervisor, is what they called back in the day for a home builder. And then I went into sales because somewhere along the line, I majored in economics at Emory University, but somewhere along the line, I learned that people have to have things explained properly to them. And people have to find a way to know what you have that is for sale, and then they want to buy it. I think what people too often, although I respect car dealers the old way where no one wants to go buy a car because you got to go in there and haggle with some salesperson who's just trying to get more money out of you. So you must be continuing all these years to add value to people when they're selling them, because there's something where people don't want to be sold, but they do want to buy what they want to buy. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you're proud of what you do. You like to share it to other people, and you're not trying to sell somebody something they don't need or something they want. Just the opposite. You're trying to find what is right for
That's
them.
right. Yeah,
And what
that's right. Well, my first response whenever people talk about sales is I'm like, well, nobody does anything until something gets sold, right? So
right?
you can have the best mousetrap in the world, manufacturing, a million mousetraps an hour in your factory, but unless someone's out there selling those mousetraps and someone's buying them, the factory's going to be pretty quiet, right? So nothing happens until something gets sold, right? So sales is kind of the beginning of the food chain for me, and I sort of defend it vigorously, right? But when as the years rolled on, I realized that I needed to develop a system on how to get, act, and stay in front of my customers, and how to be a pleasure to do business with always. And that's sort of all the tips and tricks that went into the book that we can chat about later. But I realized that people want to deal with people that are not a pain in the butt, right? And like you don't want to be that guy, right? And so I spent a lifetime figuring out all the ways and means how to not be that guy you just talked about in the car dealership, right? And how do I figure out ways of getting in front of my customers, staying in front of them, and acting in front of them, so that they consider me a pleasure to do business with always, even when they have to tell me, no, I can't buy from you, because my customers are huge customers that I've sold to for many years, not just one and done. It's not like, you sell them a car and never care if they ever come back again, right? I mean, the customers I had in my last two companies, I had them for a collective of 15 years each, right? And so I didn't get all the business. And so when I didn't, I still wanted them to invite me back on the next deal, because you don't want to behave poorly, when you lose a deal and then say, man, we're never inviting that guy back. He's a psycho. He doesn't get the deal, right? And so you have to learn, how to behave, right? How to build genuine rapport, and how to move things along, how to when to sort of push forward and when to step back, right? And build in systems and processes for yourself that allow you to make sure your time's not being wasted and you're making the right investments at the right time. So that's
Makes
kind of
sense.
my
I
little
explained it very well.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, if I were going to summarize it, I would say you're thinking about what the customer really wants and their needs first. Because if you
Yeah.
satisfy their needs, then you're going to have a customer. And if you can't, then
Yeah. Usually I want to figure out, like, I always sort of caution like salespeople to take the time to look at how a customer really makes their money, right? Like, what does their business do, and how does the money machine work in their business, right? Because sometimes, and a simple example, like just to show what I mean by that is, like, I say, like, maybe like Xerox photocopiers or whatever, right? Everyone's like, wow, they sell photocopiers and printers, right? And I'm like, well, they lease photocopiers and printers. They're more of a finance company than they are a photocopier company, right? Like, the photocopier is secondary to the way they make their money, which is on long-term financing deals. So they operate more like a bank than they do like a technology company. And so when you're selling to a business, you want to make sure, you don't want to be selling to, a printer maker when you're actually selling to a bank. Like, their money, their needs are different, right? And depending upon what you're selling, software, hardware, solutions, services, whatever, you want to make sure the kind of problems they're going to want to be solving. Then you want to go another step further with them, and you want to say, hey, like, knowing that this is how they make their money, then this is probably the problem that they need to solve of the problems that we solve in our business. And if we solve those problems for them, this is how they would feel. And if I could show them feeling that way, then they would ask me how to buy my product. And that's the key to selling, right? Is figure out what is it they really need to accomplish, and how are they going to feel when it's being done in a way that they've never done it that well before, like producing more widgets, lowering their costs, higher throughput, more customers, less churn, whatever product or service you sell, right? And then show them an example and show them how they're going to feel by implementing your product, service, or solution. And that's really what resonates with them, is how they're going to feel. And it's like why they put it, why they take a guy and they put him in the Corvette and let him take a test drive, because they need him to feel what it's like to drive the Corvette. So so that it breaks down the barriers to him wanting to buy it.
it helps. You mentioned you're such a professional. You're going to have somewhere I saw some listed questions that you'd like to be asked when you go in a podcast here and there. What's a good story about how you helped someone that was in your career, a particular sales story where it was a big home run for everybody, or just a big
Uh,
business success?
Yeah, okay, and and I might have listed a few examples there. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but I mean, one of my biggest ones was the greatest story I have is the story of the DeFasco steel mill in Hamilton, Ontario, where I was still learning the ropes, but I was, very good at the products. I knew them really well. Kind of a geeky, kind of a, 20-something kid selling these products, and I knew them well, and I love selling them. And I was out on a call with the president of the company that I worked for at the time, and we were calling on DeFasco in Hamilton. They were putting in a new cold mill, and Toshiba was the manufacturer of the mill equipment. So they were on site with a team, putting in this giant mill. You can imagine what it takes to put in a new steel mill, right? And they were looking at equipment to measure and monitor signals and flow and all the things that would go on in producing steel, which I knew nothing about. I only knew how to measure signals. I didn't know anything about making steel. And so we showed up, as a general sales call. We realized that these guys were going to be buying a huge quantity of equipment for this mill. and none of it was ours, and none of it was the way we were doing it. They were doing it the old way with a bunch of analog meters and measurement systems. Think about it. I was offering a digital system, with displays and numbers and what have you, and they were looking at dials and knobs and, and pens and red ink, scrolling down a paper tape, right? They were still literally looking at analog strip chart solutions and things like that, right? And I was able to show this technician we were calling on how much better our solution would work in this, right? And he says to me, he said, "That's great, but you know, I can't change the way this is all designed by Toshiba. You'd need to talk to Toshiba about that." And the president immediately said, "Well, where's Toshiba? Are they in Japan?" And he's like, "Well, no, they're in town." Like, okay, well, where are they? And he said, "Well, they're, one town over. They have an office in Mississauga near the airport." And he's like, "Okay, well, who's in charge? What's the guy's name? And give me their address. What's his name?" And the guy gave us the address and gave us the name. And he said, "Glenn, get in your car. We're going to Mississauga." And so of course, this guy's, like 30 years older than me, and I'm the 20 something kid, right? So I'm just doing what I'm said, but kind of watching and listening. I mean, my inclination would have been to go back and try to make an appointment with the guy at Toshiba and see if I could see him at some point that week. Or he's like, "No, we're driving there now. We're going to bang on the door," right? So we drive to Toshiba, bang on the door, and lo and behold, the guy's there, and we talk to him. And we, of course, just to make a long story a little shorter, right? Like, we showed him the tech, and he agreed. "Yeah, this is very cool." He said, "But you sell electrical stuff, and all the electrical stuff for the cold mill is designed in and sold and serviced and delivered by Gullivan International, one of the world's largest electrical distributors. And anything that's electrical plugs in or has a signal running through it has to be delivered, supplied, tested, and furnished by Gullivan." And he's like, "Okay, where are they? Who's in charge and what's their address?" And lo and behold, we got the name and number of a guy over near the airport. He said, "Glenn, get in your car. We're going to see the guys at Gullivan." And so again, you can imagine, we knocked on the door, the Gullivan guy, interesting. He didn't really care. He just, he said, "Well, if Toshiba wants it and Dofasco wants it, then I don't really care." But he said, like, any of these things that changes need to be signed off by the vice president of Dofasco back at the steel mill in Hamilton, right? And we're like, "Well, okay, well, who's the vice president and where's he working in it? Where is he in the plant, right?" And so it wasn't that day, it was the next day. But the next day we got back in our car and we drove back to Hamilton to meet with the vice president and explain to him why our solution for digital monitoring of the signals was a better thing. And I ended up getting an order for the largest order of my career ever. It was more than my entire quota for the entire year in one order. And we did it all in a matter of 24 hours, having never not sent a signal, email, fax, quote. We didn't mail anything, ship anything, deliver anything. It was all done in real time. And it showed me the power of, like, when people say, "Oh, I left him a voicemail, I call him back, I'm going to make an appointment." No, like, if you're in a building and the guy says, "Well, I like what I'm seeing, but my boss needs to weigh in on it." We're like, "Okay, great. Can you introduce me to your boss now?" And that's the difference between the really good salespeople and then the also rans, right? That never know, they're the ones, when you ask them what's going on with the deal, they say, "Oh, they sent it upstairs to the powers that be," right? And I'm like, "Who's the powers that be?" Right? And then they're like, "Oh, I don't know. No one knows." And I'm like, "Okay, well, you're not getting the order." Right? Because the guy who's getting the order knows the powers that be, because he's talked to them already and made sure that we're within spec, within budget, within, tolerances, within whatever. And he's covered off the whole scope of people that are required based on the purchase level that's happening. If it's a $5,000 item, it might only be one or two guys. But if it's a $500,000 purchase, the CEO is probably signing off on it. Right. And so you need to figure all that out up front and make sure, you need to start and sort of finish at the highest possible level relative to the size of the deal that you're selling. In other words, you don't want to take a $500, printer, for instance, to the CEO and say, "Oh, I want to get your impression on this." But if it's a $500,000 50-ton stamping machine for an auto plant, you can bet that the top guys in the plant are signing off on that equipment. So you want to start with those guys and get them to push you down, so that you can always go back and check in on where you sit in the food chain of the deal. Are you winning, losing? what's required to make this deal happen. Because a lot of times they'll tell you, hey, you're not getting the order because we don't like your product, we don't like your company, or we have a contract with a different company, or we're doing it through this financing and they'll only deal with X, Y, and you don't qualify and you're not this. And you're like, oh, that's not fair. And it's like, too bad. Like, those are all the reasons why you often lose and never know. But if you're talking to the big guys, they just tell you up front, like, you need a license, or you need this, or you need that, and you don't have this. And you can, but you're not going to get that from the guy on the shop floor. He's going to say, oh, whatever the powers that be say, it's beyond my pay grade.
That was a good story and a lot of lessons there. What's another story, maybe a difficult time that you had that you overcome? Because anybody that's accomplished something has had a near failure or
Okay,
a
I got a good
impactful
one.
time or yeah.
So my first business that was, targeting the cellular industry, right? The cellular network industry. I sold it after 15 years, and it was a life-changing amount of money. I sold it to a public company, and I got millions of dollars worth of shares in their public company. This was a household name in Canada. Anyone would have known them. And just to make a long story short, I didn't do any due diligence on them because I I knew who they were, right? They sold cell phones. They're in the malls. I knew exactly who they were. I knew the president, the CEO guy was sort of like, infamous in some ways for his, crazy business shenanigans and whatever that he'd done and deals he's done. And he'd been around a long time. And they offered, millions of dollars in shares, but no cash for the deal, very little cash. And what I didn't realize was that their business, they had tentacles out into all sorts of areas that was draining cash from their corporate pools, you know, faster than you can imagine. And they saw how much cash our business was throwing off, and they saw that this could be a part solution to some of their problems. And they ended up buying our business for stock. I became an insider, couldn't sell my stock. And within 18 months, they'd bankrupted both my company and their company. And all of us lost our jobs. And I ended up having given them a company I'd spent 15 years building for free, and I got nothing. And I was 40 something years old with kids and, and what have you. And of course, I had nothing left. I went from multimillionaire on paper to broke ass, right? In one fell swoop. I had no idea that it was coming. I wasn't at the C-suite. I work in the operating division, but they ended up putting our company into receivership, and then they went into receivership and bankruptcy, and the shares became worthless. And I didn't get a penny out of it, which is why I started Gap Wireless, and because I needed a job. And for me, it was easier to start a new company than it was to apply for a job. And people are like, well, how in the world did you bounce back from it? And I'm like, well, I didn't have time to bounce back. I just had to like go and get a job, like and so I didn't have time to like fret and moan and and cry over it. And there are people like, well, I never could have done that. And and other people struggled. There were two other partners that struggled with the way it had gone down. And but I basically, within days, I had already taken money out of my retirement savings and had started the funding for Gap Wireless, which grew from $1 million in sales its first year to 84 million the year I sold it. And so, out of the ashes, right? But, you know, here I was, I thought I was this multi-millionaire in the early 2000s, and I was broke and I had nothing actually. And the worst part was that, when people said, well, you gave away your company, and I did. So when I sold Gap Wireless, I sold it for cash, of course, right? I didn't take any shares, right? So yeah.
Wow. Well, congratulations. Yeah, you have a can do, go get it, get up in the morning, put your pants on attitude. It's nice to see. It's inspiring. What clients do you have now? Are the
So the customers we deal with now are mainly with what are called IOUs, investor-owned utilities, are our biggest customers. But it's wherever you're driving down the road and you see a giant power plant with all the transformers and all those little round things and things shooting out of them, and the green things and whatever. They're basically circuit breakers and transformers and battery banks and insulators, and we sell equipment to test all that stuff. So that's called the substation, where you see all that stuff coming down into these fenced in pens and things. And so any utility that's generating or distributing electricity, is our customer. And but it's the big ones, like Duke Energy and Florida Light and Pacific Gas. These are our biggest customers, and they buy equipment to test the transformers, the breakers, the battery banks. They test for, and there's, we sell thermal cameras and other kinds of camera products for analyzing any problems with the lines and things like that. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
That's pretty cool. And those are big customers. I imagine they're going to be needing what you sell for a long, long time. My dad retired at 79 for health reasons, didn't want to, and went on to live happily for significant time afterwards, but he enjoyed his work. I can see you're passionate, you enjoy your work, and you like adding
Yeah.
value, creating, making money, all those things for your family. How long, what's it look like ahead now? Just gonna keep going and growing for another $84 million
Yeah.
a year revenue business,
Yeah.
or
I don't know if I'll get that long. That took, 15 years to get to. And I mean, I'm 63, so I'm not sure I'll quite get to the math. I don't know if it'll work out, right? But, I'd like to see where I can get this. This company I bought by myself, though. The last company I had a partner. The one before I had two partners. So this one is also sort of a personal goal to see what I can do in, over the next 3 to 5 years by myself. You know, whatever I can leverage or however I can, network my company in other whatever ways and means to grow. And but knowing that I kind of had to resolve to my own devices to get it done, right? And so it's a little bit of an internal challenge that I'm doing. But I'd probably like to quiet down in 3 to 5 years, economy depending. Like right now the economy is kind of weird and wonky, but I do believe that the power grid will be receiving a significant amount of funding and optimization in the coming years to feed all the data centers that are exploding because of AI.
yeah,
And so there's just an insatiable demand for power
yeah.
and more than we can even deliver. And so, my little piece of where I'm involved, I think should benefit. And yeah, but I don't think I'll do it again for like a fourth time, if I sold it in a few years, I'd probably then okay, I'll maybe try to quiet down a little bit and just relax and,
And in your last
go.
company and this company, do you have a lot of big staff, or is it?
The last company, Gap, we grew to 80 people, but in 2019 we had another like near death experience. We had branched off into areas of telecom that we didn't belong, and we didn't know what we were doing, and we started losing truckloads of money. And we ended up going from 80 people to 29 people in one day and having to do a massive adjustment. And so, but by the end in 2022, when we sold it, we were at 43 people, I think. The company I bought has about 10 people. I think we're up to 13 now. So very small company. So the gap had grown to about 80, but had to shrink down to more reasonable 40, which is where it belonged, and then get back and right size itself for financial health reasons. But yeah, that's kind of the size of the companies that I'm dealing with.
And right now, if people want to find out about your business, they want to find out about you, would you suggest they go to your website or?
So if they want to communicate to me and talk about, they can go to my website and connect with me there. There's a contact and everything, but LinkedIn's probably the better way to get a hold of me. I'm there every day. I'm a LinkedIn top voice. I'm posting every day, lots of content and lots of interaction with people, and they can easily connect with me and then communicate with me any questions, comments that they have. Happy to talk to anybody in that manner. But either the website or LinkedIn are the best
And
best
what
two
is the
ways.
website so everybody can
So it's
get
just glenpoulos.com. So my name.com.
Okay. So you're growing another business. You're healthy. You got years ahead. When you were a little kid, I'm just wondering if you ever thought you would own or start businesses because going to work for the government, as you said, is not the, oh, I mean, maybe it is in some cases, but a lot of people, that's not the path to.
Right.
And a lot of my government, I grew up in Washington, D.C. A lot of my family was career government. So, and they had great contributions. So I love people that work at the government. I have a special passion, obviously, with this podcast, Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance.
Yeah.
I like entrepreneurs and business owners because they create jobs and do a lot of good. But when you were a kid, was there anything that you can look back to and think, man, I thank goodness that boss told me, but I didn't know myself, or I dreamed of doing it but didn't because I got this job, or how did that go?
So yeah, so funny. I was actually raised in a motel. So my parents owned a motel in Niagara Falls, and I grew up servicing customers, cleaning rooms, cutting the grass, vacuuming the pool. was a motel on Lundy's Lane in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada, and it was very busy and very interesting and colorful childhood. And I got to interact with customers from a very young age. I got started getting paid by the hour when I was 8 or 9, and so I was always working. But honestly, and some people sort of look at me sideways when I say this, but I've always had this like incredible fear of poverty that drives me forward to earn money at all. Like I just can't sit still, right? And people are like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Because I'm afraid of being poor. Like I don't, like." And so that's why I started a business so quickly after losing the one before, right? I didn't have time to cry in my milk. I had to and it's out of sheer and utter fear, right? And so I had always been chasing opportunities to make money as a kid. I always had a job, and the government was a very lucrative position coming out of electronics school. I got a chance to work with them up in the Arctic, and I was making 3 or 4 times what my cohorts were making come out of school because I had danger pay, isolation pay. The government was paying well. And so again, even though it was the government, you're like, okay, well, I was still doing really well by it, and so I've always been sort of driven to, I call it like sort of poverty avoidance, right? And it naturally pushes me forward and gives me the get up and go that I need, to work every day. And it's a natural instinct. I don't have to feed it or anything. It just comes naturally, right? And so hopefully at the end I'll be able to let it go and relax for, at some point. But yeah, so I've always been driven to find ways and means to make money even as a young kid. So
What drove you to get so involved in LinkedIn? Because top voice and all that, you are very engaged.
yeah, well, just one, I wrote this book, Never Sit in the Lobby, 57 tips on how to build a career in sales. And I do it to sort of just keep the buzz going around they call it thought leadership and what have you, around the messages that I have and the stories that I like to tell, and sort of use it to share podcasts that I'm on or stories from the book, or other stories that are relevant, just to try to keep the dialogue going, because otherwise it kind of, you write a book, you publish it, and you go off in the sunset with 80 million other books, right? And so just to keep the whole dialogue going, which is why I find LinkedIn to be the best place for that. And there's a lot of good conversations that get going, but it's also challenging and hard work now too. Like, it's not saying it was easier before, but I mean, but now it's kind of it's tough to get through the noise, and we've all seen how social media is evolving, and so many ads and sponsored content and stuff like that. You really need to work to figure out how to message it so that it gets put out on the algorithm and customers can read it, right?
Right, right. Well, I
Yeah.
think you did have an entrepreneurial background with parents being business owners. That was gave you some comfort or orientation to how that goes, and also the stress of what that means, because the paycheck doesn't just come
Yeah. Yeah.
unless the hotel performs. Just circle back on that. I usually ask people this because it's just a part of everyday consideration now, and you actually have listed on your LinkedIn profile, but AI and growth expert. A
Yeah,
little
so
bit
I
of
use
thoughts
I
on
use
AI.
AI everywhere I possibly can. I've been playing around with a little bit of consulting about trying to help customers to adapt AI, but over the last 6 months or so, my other business has gotten very busy, so I have to sort of divide my time smartly. But I'm using AI to help me to look for more opportunities to quote our equipment, like to research, bidding sites, government sites, utility sites, to find, because like it's very hard to find every opportunity out there with a small group of people in a business. And so now there's ways of getting AI to data mine for you, and then you get these tenders and things for to quote, and it can take a week or two to respond to them, using AI interpretation to go through these long tenders and figure out all the relevant points that I need to complete. And then using my past sort of submissions and offers that I've done, pull from that to help me to do a lot of the legwork that you used to have to do manually, and also coming up with marketing ideas, coming up with, text campaigns and things, to share with customers. It's super powerful looking at contracts and complicated purchase documents from large corporations. They have like 80-page of terms, and I'm like, I can't read that. Like, I'll never get through it, right? But you can put that in AI and say, oh, well, do you, it says you need 10 million of insurance, and it says, indemnification of this, that, and the other thing, and a warranty for, and it quickly isolates the points you need to get to, and the rest is boilerplate, right? So I'm using AI at every possible turn, however possible I can. But of course, I'm not using it blindly. I'm not just saying, hey, write me an email, cutting and pasting it and sending it to thousands of customers. It's give me an idea, what are some key points, and then using it to help me craft something, and then humanizing it, and then, sending it, kind of thing. And yeah, so I used it in all aspects of the business, also in the finance department, looking at the financials and helping me with cash flow, and is the health of the company improving or disproving, or whatever, over time. And it's just so capable. It's incredible, the tool that it's become for business owners.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And we'll wrap up. Personally, you have a big family, you mentioned, and you have some hobbies you enjoy. You're in a beautiful part of the world.
I have 5 kids. It's a blended family, but 5 kids. I have my wife. We live half in Florida, business, and half in Canada. I'm a little bit more in Florida. My wife's probably a little bit more up in Canada. We have 2 French bulldogs, which we love greatly, and it's a big part of our lives. And play pickleball. We have a place up on the Blue Mountain and the ski slopes in Canada, and we're in Orlando in Florida. So yeah, so things are good. And the market's tough right now, but you just have to press on every day, show up every day, get up, go to work, and and time marches on. And it's you never know what to expect tomorrow, but you got to show up for it, right? So
Absolutely. Well, you're definitely showing up. I admire all your accomplishments. I appreciate you coming on the show, the Henry Harrison podcast, Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance. And you can find Glenn Poulos on his website, which is benpoulos.com. You can also look him up on LinkedIn, where he's a great contributor. And I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to wrap up.
no, it's
Good,
all
good.
good.
Well, I
Yeah.
kept you a while, and I think the audience is going to love it.